Hey, welcome to the channel. We hope that you enjoy today's stories and check out the chapters on the video to see all the stories for today. But before we get into this video, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to get notified when we release a new video. So let's get into the video.
The Pale Lady Standing in Torrential Rain. I recently joined this sub as I have always had an interest in the paranormal world. I believe spirits exist, human and inhuman, but what I'm about to say happened to me. 30th June 2014, at Calcutta, India. My dad had been in the ICU for nearly a month in a semi-conscious or vegetative state owing to tubercular meningitis. It was a private hospital and so it became very difficult to continue with the treatment for financial reasons, and the doctors there had told us that there was no hope either. At that point, we decided to shift him to a renowned government hospital and had to go through a lot of hassles to get him not only admitted to the hospital but directly into the ICU. So, on this very day, we were all set to move him from this private hospital to the government one. The hospital discharge formalities took several hours, and by the time my dad was put into an ambulance for the shift, it was evening and it started to pour very heavily. My sister and a cousin accompanied my dad in the ambulance and my uncle followed them in a car. After traveling for about 45 minutes, there came a junction which usually had heavy traffic jams, and we decided to let the ambulance go in that direction, as cops would let the ambulance pass anyway, and once they get past that signal, it would be a relatively quick drive to the hospital. Me and my uncle took a U-turn to take a different and slightly longer route which would have lesser traffic so that we could reach the hospital before or at the same time as the ambulance. After taking the U-turn, we continued down the road and there I saw her, an old lady standing almost in the middle of the road. The skin was as white as paper. She was wearing a white Indian sari and was holding a thick walking stick. It looked more like a branch of a tree staring in the direction where the ambulance went. She didn't have an umbrella with her, and all the shops were closed because of the rising level of water in the street. The water had risen to the point where our driver couldn't take his foot off the accelerator, lest the water might seep in through the exhaust. Me and my uncle, I both saw her but didn't talk about the experience until a couple of days later. My dad passed away on the 13th of July. To this day, it still baffles me what was that lady doing amidst torrential rain, in the middle of the road holding something like a branch of a tree, and I have never ever seen someone having such pale and white skin.
I think I have the ability to feel the paranormal story. I think it's worth pointing out that I'm not a person that is quick to believe in things such as UFOs and ghosts unless there's proof. Let me start at the beginning. When I was young, around 5 to 6 years old, I had an encounter with a ghost. I can very vaguely remember it, but my mother, whom I woke up to that night, remembers it very vividly. I was lying in my bed and saw a man in a blue shade look over me. I was not scared, but I did go to my mom, who was asleep, and woke her up. She went downstairs and got some pictures of family members who had passed away. She was showing me the pictures and suddenly I stopped her and pointed to one picture and said, "That's him." Apparently, it was the ex-husband of my mom who passed away in a traffic accident before I was born. Some years prior to this, when I was around 3 years old, my mom went to a medium because she was struggling a lot with his passing and wanted to communicate with him. I went with her because she didn't have anyone to look after me that afternoon. I was playing with some toys next to my mom and the medium, and suddenly out of nowhere the medium pointed at me and said,
"He can feel them."
Again, I cannot remember this, but my mom told me this. Since I saw the ghost, I haven't had any paranormal encounters except the occasional feeling of bad energy. However, last week when I was lying in bed, I had another encounter. I was half asleep, that's why I'm not totally sure if it was real, but it definitely felt real. Anyway, I saw a face, again in a blue shade, hovering above me with a big smile. It was like a taunting smile to try and wake me up. At first, I thought it was my dad, so I said, "Go away," which woke me up. Then the face went down next to me and disappeared. After this, I was fully awake and I was not sure what to make of it. The thing is, I wasn't scared at any of these times. I like to believe that I've got a guardian angel looking over my shoulder. But what I find weird is that I never had an encounter since I was around 6 years old. But suddenly last week, I saw something again. Also, my mom would never make up a story like this. That's why I fully believe it. I never really talked to anyone about this except my mother, but I would love to talk to other people who've had similar experiences.
If you're enjoying today's video about stories of our lives, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this and more. Now, let's get back to the video.
One last goodbye. My great-grandmother, whom I was relatively close to, died in February after a long and beautiful life. During her final weeks of life, I was depressed by the thought of her being alone or in any discomfort as she passed on, since I couldn't be there with her, as I live across the country. And of course, saddened by the finality that I will never see my grandma again. So 2 days before she passed, I fell asleep in the middle of the day and was pleasantly surprised by my dream. I heard a heart monitor flatlining. My heart raced. Suddenly, I was in a room alone with my grandma. She was lying in a hospital bed, so I moved towards her to hold her hand in her final moments. But then the monitor stopped screaming and it was calm again. She was present with me, and she turned her wide-open eyes to look directly at mine. It was very realistic as she could not move much or speak, just like in her final days. But I remember looking into her eyes and knowing she was there with me. I squeezed her hand and told her she was the best grandma. When I woke up, I felt calm and at peace, though I immediately wondered if she had passed already that day. I marked the time as 4:15 p.m. on Thursday. The day finished with no word. It was 2 days later, surrounded by family, that she took her last breath. When I talked to my mom after, I kept thinking there must have been some reason she visited me when she did. So, I just listened for clues. Then my mom told me that she had reminded the family earlier in the week that they needed to do the last rites for my grandmother, an incredibly devout Catholic, so she could pass on in peace. She said they had done it on Thursday. I asked what time the priest had visited. He got there at 3:45 p.m., she told me. Bingo. It all made sense then. I feel so incredibly grateful that she came to visit me and bring me the peace she was feeling after her final blessings. I know she heard my message, and that meant all the world to me.
Something kind of weird happened in the library I used to work at. So, in my last year and a half of high school, I used to work 2 days a week in our local library as a student page, reshelving returned books. The building is not very big. It would maybe take me 30 seconds to walk from one end to the other, although I'm very tall and have been told I walk fast. Anyways, to preface the story a little bit, my first week or two working there, June of 2021 I believe, I was in the bathroom about to wash my hands and the motion sensor tap turns on by itself and continues to run by itself for around a full minute. For reference, the tap will usually turn off within seconds of you turning and moving your hands away from it, and I was not close enough to the tap for me to have set it off. I brought this up months later with my older coworkers who had been there much longer than I, over 5 years at the time, and this had never happened to them or myself in the time since. Definitely weird, but not entirely unexplained, as obviously technology can malfunction. I brought this up to them months later because we had time to kill, as this was close to closing time and we would sometimes stand around chatting. It's a library in a small town. The world is not going to end if we spend a bit of time chatting. I'm not entirely sure how the subject came up, but we started talking about spooky things that had happened to them in the time they worked there, just odd sounds or bad feelings that I can't verify but can tell the stories if someone wants us to not make this longer than need be. Anyways, on to my own story. In the time I worked there, I'd often hear weird sounds like shelves or books moving, which isn't that odd as things do shift, especially in the cold. I'm Canadian, it gets cold and it's a log building, and I would have one headphone in at a low volume listening to music, but I can certainly say those sounds weren't my headphones. There were also occasions where I could swear I heard footsteps or a person in the kids section, and I'd go over to check and there would be nothing. My two coworkers would be at the front desk and not a single patron in the library. I've also seen a dark shape or two out of the corner of my eye that is no longer there when I turn to look. But I'll admit I may have an overactive imagination and can be a bit spooked, and the shelves are tall and black, so easily could be that. I would also like to clarify that anytime any of the above I've mentioned, I've been alone out on the floor putting books away. My coworkers would be at the front desk, and this would all happen around 6 to 8 p.m. There would rarely be patrons because it was a small town at night. But the main event was at the end of August 2022. It was my last day working there as I was moving away to go to university, and it was myself and two others working that night, a guy a year older than I am. Let's call him Adam, and an older woman who is a little bit spiritual, let's call her Fiona. Anyways, it was roughly 10 minutes before we were closing, and Adam and I were standing at the front desk while Fiona was going to lock the door, literally right beside the front desk, like a meter or two away. Anyways, while Adam and I were standing there, we heard the entirely unmistakable sound of a person shoving a full row of books off a shelf on the back wall. I've done it myself more than once by accident. It's an unmistakable sound. I swear I heard all the books hit the ground, and I look at Adam and go,
"Did you hear that?"
And he said yes. We both go and look at the exact area it came from, and there was nothing. I searched the whole library, again, not a large building, and not a single book was out of place, not on the floor, not laying on the shelf, nothing. Obviously, it was only the three of us there. Adam had done the closing walkthrough minutes before to make sure there were no patrons. There were none, and Fiona was literally right beside us locking the door, and not behind the plexiglass shield that covered the front desk. Didn't hear a thing. If Adam, who was right beside me, hadn't heard it, I would have thought I imagined it.
Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to see more videos about stories of our lives. Click on one of these videos to watch more, and see you soon.